There's a rule written into the bones of every spacefaring civilization that has ever survived long enough to write rules. It goes like this: do not get involved. Not in border wars between empires older than your sun. Not in famines on worlds that chose their own gods. Not in extinctions that the universe, in its cold arithmetic, has already decided on. You watch. You document. You file the report under naturally occurring collapse, and you go home. Every species learns this. Usually the hard way. Usually once. The Krethali learned it when they tried to save the blooming choir of Vesh and lost 11 colony ships and 40,000 lives to a gratitude that curdled into territorial claim. The Solin Collective learned it when their mercy mission to the Dusk Rings started a 300-year war that still has no name because no one alive remembers what it was about. The Galactic Forum wrote it into their founding charter in language so unambiguous it had no synonyms. Non-intervention is not cruelty. It is wisdom wearing cruelty's face. Every species learned this rule, except one. Humanity looked at the rule, turned it over in their hands like an interesting rock they found on a beach, nodded thoughtfully, and put it back down in exactly the wrong place. When the distress signal came, not from a fleet, not from a government, not from any military or diplomatic or scientific body, but from children, from creatures barely old enough to understand what dying meant, broadcast on every frequency in a voice that shook, because it was trying not to, humanity did not file a report. They picked up the phone. What happened next did not just save a species. It rearranged the furniture of the entire galaxy. And nobody, not the Forum, not the elder races, not the thousand-year empires watching from a careful distance, was ever quite the same after. This is that story. The signal came in on a Tuesday. This matters only because it was a Tuesday in the most specific, unremarkable sense, the kind of Tuesday that has no business being the hinge point of galactic history. Lieutenant Commander Priya Vasquez was on her third cup of bad coffee, filling out a maintenance request for the water recycler in Bay 7 that had been making a sound like a cat gargling marbles for 6 weeks. The Threshold Station, humanity's outermost deep space listening post, orbited a brown dwarf so dim and so far from anything interesting that its crew of 41 had developed 17 different card games and a small but passionate following for competitive bread baking just to stay sane. It was not a place where things happened. Priya was on her fourth attempt at correctly spelling hydraulic resonance oscillation when Ensign Tobias Park sat up very straight at his monitoring station in a way that immediately made the back of her neck prickle. Tobias was the kind of person who communicated exclusively through posture. A slouch meant everything was fine. A mild lean forward meant something mildly interesting. The way he was sitting right now, spine vertical, both hands flat on the console, head tilted like a dog hearing a frequency that humans couldn't, meant she should put down her coffee. She put down her coffee. "Talk to me, Park." Signal coming in. He paused. His hands hadn't moved. "It's on all of them." "All of what?" "All of the frequencies, Commander. Every band we monitor. Every band we don't monitor. Something is broadcasting on channels we didn't know existed until 30 seconds ago, when this signal invented them." She was standing next to him before she'd consciously decided to stand. The readout looked like someone had spilled a drink across the spectrum analyzer. A wash of signal so wide and so complete that for one disorienting moment, she thought the equipment had failed. It hadn't failed. Origin point? The Veth Nebula. Deep interior. Region we don't have survey data for. Nobody does. It's been flagged as non-navigable for about 200 years because of the ion storm density in the outer shells. He pulled up a secondary screen. Signal's been traveling. Estimated travel time to reach us at this intensity? For days. Whatever this is, it's been shouting for 4 days, and we just caught the edge of it. She leaned in. The signal had been decoded automatically. Their systems were good at that, pulling structure out of noise, finding the grammar in static. What it found was not code, not a mathematical sequence, not a standard first contact prime number protocol. It was a voice. It was unmistakably, and in a way that sat wrong in her chest, the voice of something young. The translation algorithms were doing their best, pulling from every documented xenolinguistic database, cross-referencing against known syntax structures, and what they were producing was rough, jagged at the edges, but coherent enough to make Priya go very still. "Please, please come. We don't know who is listening. We are broadcasting to everything and everyone, and we need someone to hear this. Our mother is sick. She has been sick for a long time, and now she is dying, and we don't know what to do." We are her children, and we are scared. Please. Our nest is in the deep place, past the storms. We can guide you through if you come. Please come. Please. We are begging. Asterisk the message looped. It had been looping, the timestamp on the signal suggested, for approximately 96 hours. Priya straightened up. She looked at Tobias. Tobias was looking at her with the expression of a man who very much wanted someone else to make the decision that was currently sitting in the room like an uninvited guest who'd already eaten all the food. Give me command, she said. Earth. I want a direct line. And someone go get Dr. Ewan. She's the senior xenolinguist on station. I want her eyes on this translation before I put in the official report. What are you going to tell command? Tobias asked. Priya picked up her coffee, realized it was cold, put it back down. I'm going to tell them exactly what we're hearing, she said. And then I'm going to let them figure out what to do about it. She paused. And then I'm going to tell them what I think we should do about it. Which is different. What Priya thought they should do, as it turned out, was not very different from what 12 million other people thought they should do once the signal, carefully, officially through proper channels with 17 layers of bureaucratic processing, became public knowledge 48 hours later. The signal leaked, of course. Signals always leaked. Someone at one of the relay stations couldn't help themselves, and by the time Earth's Unified Space Authority had finished debating whether to classify it, and ultimately decided with some reluctance that you could not classify a message being broadcast on every known frequency in the galaxy, the audio, translated, cleaned up, made heartbreakingly clear, had been listened to approximately 4 billion times. The voice was unmistakably juvenile. The xenolinguists were careful about this, careful not to project, careful to note that cross-species developmental parallels were unreliable and that what sounded young in one species might be standard adult register in another. They were very responsible and measured about it. Nobody cared. The voice sounded like a child calling for help, and the entire human species as a body responded to it the way humans responded to children calling for help, which was with their whole chest. The forums were instantaneous. The commentary was volcanic. The official channels were flooded. The Unified Space Authority, which had been in the middle of a routine budget cycle, found itself fielding 9 million communications in a 24-hour period, most of which contained some variation of the phrase, "What are we going to do about this?" The Galactic Forum, who monitored human communications as a matter of standard practice, because humans were, in the diplomatic consensus of the galaxy's elder races, a species that bore watching, sent a formal advisory within 72 hours of the signal going public. It came from the forum's senior arbiter, a Krethali elder named Velomith, who had been mediating interstellar disputes for longer than humanity had had writing systems. The advisory was polite. It was carefully worded. It cited the non-intervention accords by article and subsection. It used phrases like the wisdom of restraint and historical precedent and the natural processes of species life cycles, and, in its closing paragraph, gently noted that the Veth Nebula was not within human-claimed territory and that any expedition into the region would require forum approval, which, given the political sensitivities of the area, would likely take between 3 and 5 standard years to process. The advisory received a formal acknowledgement from the Earth Diplomatic Corps within 6 hours. Then, it was, to the best of available evidence, completely ignored. The person who broke the logjam was not a diplomat, a general, or a politician. Her name was Dr. Amara Cole, and she was a veterinarian. Specifically, she was the head of the Xenobiological Medicine Division at the University of Cape Town's Interstellar Life Sciences Institute, which is a job title that sounded very impressive and mostly involved her arguing with funding committees and staring at biological data from alien organisms that no human would ever actually encounter. She was 44. She had the particular kind of tired that lived permanently behind her eyes after 20 years of caring about things that nobody else remembered to care about, and she had been listening to the looped signal on repeat for approximately 6 hours when she submitted the paper. It wasn't a long paper. 17 pages. She'd written longer abstracts. The title was Preliminary Acoustic Analysis of the Veth Nebula Signal, Evidence for Draconic Phylogenetic Origin, and Implications for Known Xenobiological Taxonomy. What it said, boiled down to its essential core, was this: she knew what these creatures were. Or rather, she knew what they were related to. 300 years ago, a survey vessel had briefly mapped the outer edges of the Veth Nebula before the ion storms pushed them back. They'd managed to document at long range a class of megafauna unlike anything previously cataloged, creatures of enormous size, capable of sustained atmospheric flight, exhibiting complex social behavior, and, most remarkably, what appeared to be biological plasma generation. The survey team had called them, with the creativity of people who had been in deep space for 2 years and missed their families, Type 7 atmospheric megafauna, class Draconic. Everybody else, in every subsequent document, report, and cultural artifact, had called them dragons. The acoustic signature of the signal, Amara's paper argued with 87 pages of supporting data appendices, matched the documented vocalizations of this species at the juvenile developmental stage. The creatures broadcasting were young, genuinely, biologically, not yet fully developed young. And they were broadcasting because something was wrong with their mother. The paper went up on the preprint server at 11 in the morning. By 3 in the afternoon, it had been downloaded 400,000 times. By midnight, it had been read by every major government on Earth, 17 alien diplomatic missions, and the senior staff of the Galactic Forum. By the following morning, Amara was being asked to testify before the Unified Space Authority's Emergency Committee on Xenobiological Affairs. She brought her coffee. She'd learned to always bring her coffee to things like this. The coffee was the only reliable part of any given situation. The Emergency Committee met in a room designed to look important, which it achieved primarily through the application of large windows overlooking Earth's orbital ring, and the liberal use of a wood called Brazilian cherry that had no business being used for government furniture. 12 people sat around an arc of table. Most of them were wearing expressions of people who had already decided what they were going to decide, and were now waiting for the proceedings to confirm it. Amara was asked to present her findings. She did. She kept it to the point. She was not, by nature, a person who liked to repeat herself. Then, Admiral Kwame Asani, who commanded Earth's second deep space fleet, and had the posture of a man who had spent 40 years practicing not looking surprised, asked the question that everyone in the room was avoiding. Dr. Cole, in your professional assessment, and I want to emphasize professional, not emotional, not theoretical, what is likely to happen to the juveniles in the Veth Nebula if the adult female dies? Amara looked at him for a moment. She appreciated that he'd asked it straight. Without an adult to guide them, protect them, and teach them to regulate their plasma generation, they'll destabilize, she said. Dragons, even the documented Type 7 variety that we have limited data on, appear to require extended parental guidance through adolescence. Unguided, the plasma generation becomes uncontrolled. In a planetary atmosphere, that's catastrophic. In the ion storm environment of the Veth Nebula, with the electromagnetic interference already present, it accelerates. Uncontrolled plasma generation meeting ion storm activity means runaway reactions. It means they either burn out individually or they trigger a cascade event in the nebula itself. How large a cascade event? Someone asked from the far end of the table. Amara set down her coffee. The Veth Nebula contains enough unstable ion density to, theoretically, produce a chain reaction that would expand significantly into the surrounding sectors. We're talking about a region that 8 inhabited systems border. She let that sit for one beat. I want to be clear, this is a worst-case modeling scenario. It may not be accurate. We don't have good enough data on the specific conditions inside the nebula. But it's possible, Admiral Asani said. Everything is possible, Amara said. But yes, it's possible. The room was quiet for a moment in the way rooms got quiet when everyone was doing the same math. Then, Counselor Femi Adeyemi, who represented the African Union and had a reputation for saying out loud the things other people were thinking, said, "So we have a humanitarian crisis, a potential ecological catastrophe, and baby dragons begging for help. And the forum wants us to wait 3 to 5 years." Nobody answered. Counselor Adeyemi looked around the room. "I want to make sure I have this right before I vote." "You have it right," Amara said. The vote was 11-1. The one dissent was from a junior diplomat who cited the non-intervention accords and would later, 3 months after the mission launched, quietly change his position in a memoir that became a bestseller. The mission was approved. What it would become was something none of them, not Amara, not the Admiral, not the counselor, not the 11 people who voted yes, had any framework to imagine. Because humanity had never done anything like this before. Neither had anyone else. And the galaxy was watching. The news reached the Galactic Forum's Senior Council in the middle of their equivalent of a budget meeting, which was a coincidence so perfectly calibrated that it felt like the universe was making a point. Velomethus Scar read the formal human notification twice. It was polite. It acknowledged the forum's advisory. It cited the relevant articles of the non-intervention accords. It then explained with the patient clarity of someone who had read the document very carefully and found the loophole that the accord specifically defined non-intervention in terms of political and military engagements between recognized sovereign species. A medical emergency involving a non-contact species and its juvenile offspring was not, technically, covered. The legal team confirmed it within an hour. The loophole was real. Velomethus sat with the document for a long time. They had been doing this job for 200 years. They had seen human diplomacy, human stubbornness, human creativity, and human chaos in all its documented forms. They had never seen humanity find a loophole this fast. They sent a response. It was polite. It acknowledged the argument. It requested that humanity keep the forum updated on the mission's progress. Then, they called an emergency session of the full council. Because Velomethus had been doing this job for 200 years, and in 200 years they had learned one thing above all else. When humanity moved fast and found good reasons for it, the galaxy changed. Every time, without exception, the mission launched 19 days later, before the forum had finished its emergency session. Humanity sent 3 ships. Nobody expected that to be enough. They were wrong about the numbers, but right about the instinct. It wasn't the ships that would matter. It was what the ships carried. It was the people inside them who had, collectively, spent their entire lives learning how to keep things alive. And it was the particular impossible galaxy-confounding fact that they had come not because they were ordered to, not because there was profit in it, not because of strategic interest or territorial expansion or political calculation. They had come because children had asked for help. That was the whole reason. That was the only reason. And somewhere in the deep interior of the Veth Nebula, past storms that had turned back every ship that had ever tried to enter, past electromagnetic walls that disrupted navigation and communication, and every instrument humanity had ever built for making sense of space, something ancient and enormous, and dying was lying in the dark. And her children were still broadcasting, still calling, still hoping someone would answer. 3 ships dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Veth Nebula's outer storm boundary at 0600 hours, 19 days after the mission was approved. On the communication channel, very faint, almost lost in the static of the ion storms, the signal was still playing. Please come. Please. We are begging. Astra's Commander Vasquez, who had been assigned to lead the mission because she had been the first human to hear the signal and had never stopped thinking about it. Open the comm. This is the UES Mercy out of Earth, she said. We heard you. We're here. Tell us how to get to you. The signal stopped looping. There was a silence that lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then, in a voice that cracked in the middle and didn't quite hold itself together at the edges, something young said, You came, just that. 2 words. You came. Astra's Priya Vasquez had been a military officer for 22 years. She had the professional discipline of someone who had chosen, deliberately and with great effort, not to let things reach her in the middle of a mission. She let this one reach her, just for a second. Then, she straightened up, put on her professional voice, and said, We came. Now let's figure out how to help your mom. Behind her, in the medical bay, Amara Cole was pulling on her work gloves and looking at a treatment plan she'd been building for 3 weeks and still wasn't satisfied with, for a patient she had never seen, of a species nobody had ever treated, with a disease nobody had ever named. She had, by her own accounting, approximately a 15% chance of success. She found this extremely motivating. The Mercy moved into the storms. The stars disappeared behind the static, and the story began in earnest. The ion storms of the Veth Nebula were not storms in any sense that felt honest to the word. Storms, in the human understanding, were temporary. They had edges. They built up, raged, and moved on. The weather systems of Earth, the dust devils of Mars, the methane cyclones documented on Titan, all of them were events, defined by their beginning and their end. What existed inside the Veth Nebula was not an event. It was a condition. It was the permanent state of a region of space that had been electromagnetically unstable for longer than Earth had been a solid object. The ion density was such that sensors didn't fail so much as they gave up, displaying readings that contradicted each other with the confidence of people who had stopped caring. Navigation relied on the 3 ships traveling in tight formation, using their mass signatures to triangulate position relative to each other when everything else dissolved into noise. Communication with Earth had been possible for approximately 40 minutes after they crossed the boundary, and then had become, politely but firmly, impossible. They were alone in the dark, in the static, in the storms. And something was guiding them. The juveniles had been true to their word. When the Mercy had asked for guidance, the signal had shifted, still broadcasting on all frequencies, but now structured differently, timed differently, pulsing in patterns that Tobias Park, who had moved from Threshold Station to the mission as signal specialist and had not slept properly since, was spending 18 hours a day trying to decode into navigational data. They're doing something sophisticated, he told Commander Vasquez on the third day inside the nebula, pulling up the signal analysis on the main screen. He looked like a man running on the kind of desperate intellectual excitement that temporarily replaced sleep. It's not just broadcast. They're modulating the plasma component of a signal. The ion storm is interfering with everything electronic, right? But plasma moves differently through this environment. They're using the storm itself as a transmission medium. They're essentially bouncing a plasma-encoded navigation signal off the storm walls. Priya looked at the screen. The modulation patterns were visible once you knew what you were looking for, rhythmic, deliberate, layered in a way that suggested not one sender, but several, taking turns, coordinating. How many of them are there? She asked. Tobias hesitated. My best estimate, based on the signal variance, which is rough, I want to be clear this is rough, at least 6, possibly as many as 12. 12 juvenile dragons, alone in an electromagnetic nightmare, with a dying mother. Priya filed that information in the part of her brain where she kept things she would think about later, when thinking about them would not make her less effective at her job. Keep decoding, she said. They're trying to lead us through. Don't lose them. Dr. Amara Cole was not sleeping either, but for different reasons. She had converted the main research lab on the Mercy into something that occupied the space between a veterinary clinic and a theoretical physics experiment. The walls were covered in data, biological models, atmospheric composition analyses from the limited sensor readings they were managing to take through the storm interference. Every piece of documented information about Type 7 draconic megafauna that existed anywhere in human or allied xenobiological databases, which amounted to 17 files, 2 of which were notes from the original survey mission, and 3 of which were what one of her graduate students had charitably described as creative speculation. She was working with almost nothing. She found this clarifying. When you had almost nothing, you stopped trying to work with everything and started working with first principles. What was the creature? An organism. What did organisms need? What failed in organisms that caused dying? What could be done about failure? The signal had told them the mother was sick. It had told them she was dying. It had not, because the juveniles who were broadcasting had no medical training and no framework for the kind of diagnostic language Amara needed, told them anything specific about symptoms. But Amara had something better than symptoms. She had the signal itself. The juvenile's plasma-encoded navigation signal was, incidentally, biological in origin. They were generating it. And through Tobias's increasingly sophisticated analysis of the signal structure, she was getting, indirectly, a picture of their physiological state, their output levels, the stability of their plasma generation, the frequency characteristics that in biological plasma emitters correlated to developmental stage and health condition. They were scared. Their output was elevated and inconsistent in the way that biological systems became elevated and inconsistent under stress. But they were functional. They were healthy, or healthy enough. Whatever was wrong with their mother had not spread to them, which meant it wasn't contagious, or wasn't easily so, which meant it was internal. A condition within a mother specifically. She worked backward from this. She worked forward from what she knew of megafauna biology across species. She built a model, tore it down, built it differently. She made assumptions and flagged them, and made more assumptions and flagged those too. She slept 4 hours on the second day, and 3 on the third, and stopped counting after that. On the fourth day, she came to Commander Vasquez with something that was not quite a diagnosis and not quite a treatment plan, but was the closest she could get with what she had. Best guess, Amara said. Ion storm exposure. Long-term, chronic, saturation-level exposure to the electromagnetic environment here. The mother is enormous. The survey data puts Type 7 adults at somewhere between 60 and 120 meters. We'll know more when we see her. And her plasma generation system is almost certainly being disrupted by the ambient ion density. Biological plasma generators and organisms are sensitive to external electromagnetic interference. The storm is essentially jamming her own biology. Can you fix it? I can try. Amara paused. I want to be honest with you about what I'm working with. I've never seen this species. I have almost no biological baseline data. The treatment I'm constructing is derived from analogous mechanisms in 3 other species, and an amount of theoretical extrapolation that would make my ethics committee back home break out in hives. I have a 15% estimated probability of success, and that number is optimistic. Priya looked at her for a long moment. What's the alternative to trying? Amara said nothing, because the alternative was not something that needed to be spoken. 15%, Priya said. In military operations, we've launched missions on worse odds than that. This isn't a military operation. No, Priya agreed. It's harder. On the morning of the 6th day, inside the nebula, they found the nest. It wasn't visible in any conventional sense. The sensors were still struggling, still contradicting themselves, still producing readings that the Mercy's main computer was quietly flagging as potentially unreliable. But there was a region of the storms where the electromagnetic chaos organized itself differently, where the ion density created not a barrier, but a kind of bowl, a space of relative calm, surrounded by walls of static. Natural, structural, old. The dragons had built their home inside the eye of the storm. Of course they had. Full stop, Priya said. Hold position. Cut thrust to minimum. The Mercy settled. The other 2 ships, the Prometheus and the Nightingale, held formation on either side. The comm space was large. Not calm in any absolute sense. There was still electromagnetic interference, still ion density that was playing havoc with every instrument they had, but large and less chaotic, and in the strange filtered light of the nebula's inner region, which had a quality like standing inside a bruise they could see. Tobias said, in a voice so careful it was practically architectural, "Commander, you need to look at this." She was already looking. The Mercy's forward optical array was the one system that the ion storms couldn't fully compromise. Light still traveled like light, and what the optical array was showing on the main screen was something that short-circuited the professional part of her brain for several seconds before she could put language to it. The mother was on the floor of the comm space, on what appeared to be the surface of a large, dense body. An asteroid, possibly a captured planetoid, something solid that the nebula had accumulated over geological time, and the dragons had made into a home. She was enormous. Even at this distance, even without good sensor data to give precise measurements, the scale of her registered as wrong in the way that truly large things registered as wrong. The brain couldn't process it cleanly, kept trying to find a different explanation. She was dark-scaled, or appeared so in the nebula's filtered light, with a wingspan folded against her body that, even closed, extended further than the Mercy was long. She was still, not the stillness of sleep, the stillness of something that had been fighting for a long time and was losing the fight. Around her, moving in patterns that looked like circling and looked like comfort-seeking and looked like both at once were the juveniles. 6 of them. Each one was, by the standards of anything human had ever built, large. By the standards of their mother, they were small. They moved with the distinctive edge of young things who were trying to act older than they were, who were keeping it together because there was nobody else to keep it together, but not quite managing it around the edges. The way they orbited the mother, the way they kept landing near her and then taking off again, the way the one closest to her head periodically pressed its own head against hers in a gesture that needed no xenobiological training to read. That one, Priya thought, that one had been the voice on the signal. She had no data to support this. She was certain anyway. "Open a channel," she said. Tobias worked his board. "Best I can do in this interference is audio, Commander. No visual from our end." "That's fine." She leaned forward. "This is Commander Vasquez of the U.S. Mercy. We can see you. We're your boundary. We have a doctor with us, a healer. We want to help your mother. Can you tell us if it's safe to move closer?" The silence after was not the silence of an unanswered call. It was the silence of something young and scared, listening very hard to something it had been waiting for. "Then, you're real." The voice was the same one from the signal. Up close, or as close as this interference-drowned transmission could get, it sounded younger than it had across the void. Not the composed, desperate broadcast of a creature trying to reach the entire galaxy. Just a voice, young and cracked at the edges and very, very relieved. "We're real," Priya said. "We thought we kept sending and nobody came. We thought maybe nobody was listening. Or maybe everyone was listening and nobody was coming. We didn't know which was worse. Priya's professional composure was doing something it was not supposed to do. She let it do it for 2 seconds. Then she steadied. We were listening. It took us time to get here. I'm sorry it took time. She paused. What's your name? Another silence. Shorter. We don't. Names work differently for us. Our mother names us when we're old enough. She hasn't finished yet. A pause that had something hollow in it. She's been too sick. Okay, Priya said. Can I call you something for now? Just so we can talk. You can call us what you want. You came. You can call us whatever you want. I'm going to call the one I'm talking to right now, the one who sent the signal. I'm going to call you caller. Is that okay? A pause. Then something in the signal shifted in a way that Tobias would later, after 6 weeks of analysis, identify as the equivalent of a small laugh. Caller. Okay. Caller. I need to bring my ship closer so our doctor can assess your mother. I need to know it's safe, not for us, for your mother. We don't want to frighten her or cause her distress. Can you prepare her for our arrival? She knows you're here. She felt the ships come in. A pause. The signal quality shifted. She said you would come. She kept saying someone would come. We stopped believing her, but she never stopped believing it. Priya looked at the screen, at the enormous still shape on the distant planetoid floor, at the small shapes orbiting her. Caller. Tell her we're coming. What happened next was procedural and terrifying and completely without precedent. They moved the 3 ships into the calm space slowly, with their active systems powered down to minimum to reduce electromagnetic emission. Amara's idea, on the reasoning that if the ambient ion density was disrupting the mother's biology, their own electromagnetic output wasn't going to help. They maintained visual contact. They communicated through the juveniles, who turned out to be extraordinarily effective translators once they understood what was being asked. The caller stayed on channel the entire time. Amara worked. She had a remote assessment system that she'd modified and modified again during the 6 days of travel, a suite of passive sensors designed to collect biological data without contact, without emission, without adding to the environmental noise. She set it up on the Mercy's forward platform, and she sat with it for 6 hours, collecting, analyzing, building the picture she'd been trying to build from theory. What she found confirmed her hypothesis and frightened her considerably. The mother's plasma generation system, the biological structure that produced and regulated the plasma that was in dragons as Amara was beginning to understand them, something between blood and breath and identity, was in cascading failure. Not a single failure point. A systemic shutdown that had been progressing for a long time, slowing down and then accelerating, slowing and accelerating in a pattern that matched chronic electromagnetic overstimulation. The ion storm had been eating her alive from the inside for years. She was still alive because she was enormous and because she was old, which in biology often meant her systems had redundancy built on redundancy, fail-safes on fail-safes. But the fail-safes were failing. The cascade was now in a phase where it would not slow again. Without intervention, her assessment gave the mother days. A week, possibly, if the biological resilience was as extreme as the size suggested. Not more. Without successful intervention, the juveniles would be without guidance within a week. Amara looked at her treatment plan, looked at the 15% probability she'd assigned it, looked at the data she now had that she hadn't had before, revised the probability upward slightly because she had more information now. 19%. She went to find Commander Vasquez. I need to go out there, she said. Priya looked at her with the particular expression of someone who had been waiting for this conversation and had not been looking forward to it. Out there, I need to be physically proximate to administer the treatment. It's a plasma regeneration compound. It has to be introduced into the biological plasma generation system directly, which means at close range. My remote systems don't have the precision. She held up a hand before Priya could speak. I've thought about this. I've thought about it for 3 days. There is no other way. You want to EVA to a 100-meter dragon. 120, at least, Amara said. The optical measurements are, yes, to administer treatment in an ion storm environment where our suits are going to have reduced system reliability. Yes, based on a 19% probability of success. It went up. Priya rubbed the bridge of her nose. It was, Amara thought, a very human gesture for someone making a decision about something that was entirely inhuman in scale. And if the treatment fails, then we tried, and we get the juveniles out before the cascade triggers. I've been talking to Caller. They can navigate the storms. They can guide us out. We can evacuate them to outside the nebula and start working on a longer-term support structure. She paused. It's not enough. Without the mother, the prognosis for adolescent plasma generation control is poor. But it's something. And if the treatment succeeds? Amara looked at her for a long moment. Then, everything changes, she said. For them and for us. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Priya could do the math. A species of intelligent megafauna saved. A debt of the kind that didn't go in ledgers, but went somewhere deeper. A first contact that happened not with weapons or treaties or careful diplomatic protocol, but with a doctor in a spacesuit with a syringe the size of a car. Get suited up, Priya said. I'm coming with you. Amara blinked. You don't need to. You're not going out to a 120-meter dragon alone, Priya said flatly. That's my decision, and it's not up for discussion. Amara looked at her for one more moment. Thank you, she said. Not for the protection. They both knew that. For the company. The suits went on. The airlock cycled. Outside, in the bruised light of the nebula's eye, 6 young dragons watched a human ship open its door and let out 2 small figures into the dark, moving toward their mother. The caller had been silent on the channel for several minutes, watching. Then it said, very quietly, to nobody in particular and to everyone at once, they're small. Tobias Park, monitoring communications, started to explain the context and then stopped. Yeah, he said instead. They came all this way, in those small ships, into our storms. A pause. Humans are small, and they came anyway. Tobias looked at the readout, at the 2 biosignatures moving through the ion storm-scrambled space toward an organism the size of a building. That's kind of what we do, he said. The caller was quiet for a moment. We will remember this, it said. We will remember exactly what you look like doing this. We will describe it to our children, and their children will describe it to their children. Tobias stared at his console. He realized, going to be part of that story. He would be remembered by dragons. He sat very still with that fact for a moment, in the strange bruise light, in the quiet of the ion storms, in the middle of something that had no name yet and would have many names later. Then he straightened up because his job was to keep the channel open, and he did his job. Outside, Amara was moving toward the mother, and the mother was watching her come, and the universe was about to change in one of the small, enormous ways it changed when someone did something that didn't make sense but was right. The kind of thing that got remembered. The kind of thing that got told to children. In every language. In every species. For as long as there was anyone left to tell it. The mother's name, as best as Amara could transliterate it from the plasma-encoded sound a caller used, was something like Velsarathnum, which translated imperfectly and with the caveat that draconic naming conventions were not analogous to human ones, to something approximating she who holds the storm still. Amara thought about this as she crossed the 100 meters of charged space between the Mercy's open airlock and the creature lying on the planetoid floor. She holds the storm still. Had held. Was struggling to hold. Was fighting, with whatever reserve she had left, to keep holding while her children circled and watched and waited for something they had almost stopped believing would come. The suit's reduced efficiency systems flickered and stabilized as she walked, the ion density doing what ion density did to electronics. The life support was on its emergency backup cycling. The communication line to Commander Vasquez, moving alongside her, was dropping in and out. The handheld sensor array she was carrying was performing at approximately 40% reliability, which was better than she'd expected. The planetoid surface was uneven, covered in something that wasn't quite rock and wasn't quite mineral deposit, something that had been shaped over a very long time by the activity of large creatures living here. There were marks in it, impressions, the physical record of a family's existence in this place, written into the ground in a language Amara had no training to read. She was reading it anyway. She couldn't help it. The closer she got, the more the scale of the mother became incomprehensible in a new way. Not the distant wrongness of seeing something too large for the brain to process, but the immediate physical wrongness of standing next to something that dwarfed every category she had for large. The flank was before her now, dark scales that caught the nebula light and returned it in colors that didn't have names in standard human color vocabulary, each scale the size of a vehicle. The breathing, she could hear it, feel it, the rhythmic pressure of air moving in and out of lungs built for burning, was slow. Too slow. She had assessed many sick animals in her career. The slowness of the breathing told her everything the sensor array couldn't. "I'm at the treatment site," she told Vasquez over the flickering comm. The delivery point she'd identified through her assessment was a region near the base of the left wing, where the biological plasma generation structures were accessible through the integumentary layer. Not quite surface, not quite deep internal. The equivalent of reaching a major organ through minimally invasive access. In a 100-meter organism, this meant a location approximately 20 meters off the planetoid surface. "I see you," Vasquez said. "I'm at your 6. How are you doing?" "Working," Amara said. She had a climbing system. She had prepared for this. The suit was equipped with magnetic adhesion assists that were performing at 60% in the ion environment, which was enough. She began to climb. The mother did not move as she climbed, did not react in any way that alarmed. The caller had done its work, had been speaking to her for the last hour in the low plasma pulse language the juveniles used between themselves, explaining who these small creatures were and why they were here. Whether the mother fully understood, Amara had no way to know. She was not conscious in the active sense. She had been drifting in and out for days, the caller had said. But something in the stillness felt like permission, like trust extended towards something that had done nothing yet to earn it except come. Amara climbed 20 meters up the flank of a dying dragon in a failing spacesuit in an ion storm inside a nebula at the edge of the known galaxy, and tried not to think about the probability calculations. She thought about them anyway. 19%. She was working with compounds derived from 3 analogous biological systems and a significant amount of theoretical extrapolation. She had no precedent. She had no backup plan beyond the one that involved evacuating 6 juvenile dragons and hoping the Galaxy Forum would approve a longer-term support structure before the Cascade failure turned catastrophic. She had a 19% chance and a deep, specific, professionally irrational belief that the biology would cooperate if she asked it correctly. She reached the treatment site. The delivery system was a modified injector the size of her forearm, loaded with a compound she had been refining since 3 days before the mission launched and had last revised 16 hours ago, because that was the kind of person she was. She had made Commander Vasquez triple-check the loading. She had checked it herself twice more after that. "I'm in position," she said. "Copy," Vasquez said. She was 30 meters away, maintaining distance, watching. "Take your time." "I don't have a lot of time," Amara said. "Take what you have, then." Amara placed her hand against the scale surface next to the treatment site. It was warm, not ambient warm. Internally warm, the warmth of biological processes that were slowing but had not stopped. Something alive was here, struggling but alive. She had treated patients from 100 species in her career. Some of them had been terrifying. Some of them had been too large or too complex or too alien for anyone to have a sensible framework for. She had sat with dying things in the dark before and tried to find the thread that kept them in the world and pull on it carefully. She was good at this. She pressed the injector to the treatment site and delivered the compound. The sensation was not something she'd anticipated. The biological plasma generation structure was close enough to the surface that when the compound interacted with it, there was an output response that she felt through the suit's insulation as a warmth that was also somehow a sound below hearing, a vibration in the bone. The suit's sensor array spiked and settled and spiked again. She waited. This was the part of medicine that no training in the universe fully prepared you for. The waiting. The watching for the response to tell you whether the thing you had done what you needed it to do, or had done something else entirely. She waited for 4 minutes. Then the sensor array, damaged, limited, flickering, registered something that made her breath stop for 1 second before she understood it. The plasma generation output. It had been low and erratic and cascading toward failure. It was stabilizing, not fixed, not healed, but the cascade had slowed. The compound was interacting with the damaged biological structures, and the interaction was doing the thing she had designed it to do, the thing she had told herself it might possibly do if the analogous biology was close enough to the theoretical model, the thing she had 19% confidence in. It was working, not finished, not certain, the work of hours still ahead of it. But the direction had changed. She said, very calmly, because she was a professional, "It's responding." Then she said, quietly, because she was also a human, "Oh, thank God." Behind her, she heard Commander Vasquez make a sound that she was fairly sure was suppressed crying, which was absolutely something she was going to pretend she hadn't heard and never reference again. The next 8 hours were the longest of Amara's professional life, and she suspected, would hold that title permanently. The treatment required 3 additional doses, administered at intervals, in conditions that degraded with each passing hour as the ion storm environment fluctuated and the suit systems continued their slow decline toward exhaustion. Vasquez rotated 2 other crew members out for the second and third dose deliveries, both of them medical personnel, both of them trained, both of them performing with a focus that Amara was professionally proud of and personally grateful for. The caller stayed on the channel. It stayed on the channel for all 8 hours. It narrated what it could observe from its position. Changes in the mother's breathing, in the quality of her stillness, in the small physical indicators that a creature who had lived next to this patient its entire life could read that no sensor array could. It described, in a voice that tried to stay even and did not always succeed, what it felt like to watch. Her color is changing, it said, during the third treatment. Her scales, there's a quality they go flat when she's very bad. They've been flat for so long. They're not flat right now. They are a pause. I don't have a word for it in your language. The word in ours is the same as the word for when a fire gets given more wood. Brightening, Amara said. Yes, the caller said. Brightening. Commander Vasquez, on the planetoid surface below, was doing paperwork. This was not in any realistic sense what she was doing. She was monitoring the mission, maintaining communication with the Prometheus and the Nightingale, managing the team rotations, tracking the suit degradation rates, calculating the safety margins, and recalculating them again. But in the spaces between all of that, she was also, in the way the humans sometimes dealt with things that were too large to face head-on, filling out the mission log with the diligent thoroughness of someone who needed something to do with her hands. The mission log for day 6 inside the nebula was, if anyone ever read it, a remarkable document. The factual entries were meticulous and professional. They were interspersed with observations that had no business being in a mission log and that Vasquez would later leave in rather than delete because accuracy seemed important and accuracy included the full picture. 1,430 hours. Dr. Cole administering second treatment dose. Suit systems at 61% operational. The juvenile designated caller is describing changes in the patient's condition in real time. Its voice has changed. There is something in it that I recognize, but cannot name clinically. It sounds like hope negotiating with fear. I am monitoring closely. Asterisk 1,612 hours. The other 5 juveniles have come down to the planetoid surface. They are arranged around the treatment area at a distance that suggests deference, giving the medical team space, while maintaining visual contact. The smallest of them, whom I've mentally designated the youngest based on physical proportion, has been sitting very still near the patient's head for the past hour. It has not moved. It is watching everything we do with the particular attention of something that is trying to memorize what helping looks like. Asterisk 1847 hours. Primary treatment complete. Awaiting assessment results. Asterisk the assessment results came at 1923 hours. The plasma generation cascade had arrested. The damaged biological structures were in recovery, not reversal. They would need time, potentially significant time, to restore full function. The mother would not be at full capacity tomorrow, or next week, or possibly for months. But the direction of travel had changed completely. She was not dying. She was getting better. Amara delivered this information to Commander Vasquez in 3 sentences. Vasquez related to the Prometheus and the Nightingale in 2 sentences. The response from both ships was not formal acknowledgement, but something that on audio sounded remarkably similar to what happened in the common rooms of every ship in the human fleet when something went right that had been going wrong for a very long time. Then, Vasquez opened the channel to the caller. "Your mother is going to be okay," she said. She said it simply because some things needed simple language. There was a silence. Then, without further intermediary, without the controlled tone that the caller had maintained for 8 hours of watching and waiting and hoping without allowing itself to fully hope, a sound. It went through the comm system and through every speaker on every ship and through the bodies of 41 humans who had been in ion storm for 6 days, and it was not a word, it was not a statement. It had no translatable content. It was the sound of something young and very frightened, finding out that the thing it had been most afraid of was not going to happen. Tobias Park, at his station on the Mercy, recognized it without being able to name it. He sat with it. He thought, again, about being remembered by dragons. About the thing the caller had said, "We will describe it to our children, and their children will describe it to their children." He thought about the 6 young creatures on that planetoid who would grow up carrying this specific memory. The day the storms opened, the day the small ships came in, the day the small creatures went out in their small suits to save someone enormous. He thought about how those creatures would grow, how large they would become, how long they might live. Type 7 draconic megafauna lifespan was undocumented, but the biological evidence suggested extraordinary longevity, centuries at minimum, possibly much more. These 6 would grow into something immense, and they would remember this day their whole lives, every one of those centuries. The caller finally resolved into language again. Not Vasquez, not anyone specifically, just into the channel, into the air. "We didn't think you would really come," it said. "We sent the signal because we didn't know what else to do. But we didn't think you would really come. Not all the way in here. Not through the storms." Vasquez looked at the screen showing the planetoid, the enormous shape of the mother on it, the 6 smaller shapes beginning to move toward her. "We heard you," she said. "Why?" the caller asked. "You didn't know us. You had no reason. The big ones, the old ones, the ones who have been flying between the stars longer than your people have been alive, they didn't come. We sent to everyone. No one else came. Why did you?" Priya thought about this for a longer moment than the question probably required. "Because you asked," she said finally. Another silence. "That was enough. For us," Priya said. "That was enough." The Galactic Forum received the mission completion report 11 days later, when the Mercy emerged from the nebula and re-established communication with the relay network. The report was factual, comprehensive, and, because Priya Vasquez was the kind of officer who believed in documentation, attached to a secondary file that contained the